December.
Welcome to another.
Why not?
Why not?
Yeah, it is.
That's because
It really
each
is.
time I have to learn how to use this particular mic, speak into it, like I'm eating it.
That's right.
Ice cream, pink ice cream.
Think ice cream.
Be like
Right,
Rudzinski.
big ice cream. Okay, this is another event in our invited speaker series. I'm Jo Sanders. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. Today we have as our guest Dr. Rose Rudzinski, who is Professor of Education at Mercy University. And the mission of Mercy University is to provide a college education to underserved students, particularly those who are first generation in their families to go to college, and to working adults. Mercy University has campuses in Westchester, the Bronx, and Manhattan, and at Mercy she is Director of Educational Leadership Programs. Earlier, Rose was Dean of Education at Felician University, the Franciscan College of New Jersey. Before that, she was Professor, Department Chair, and Associate Dean of Education here at SUNY New Paltz. Rose's work focuses on social justice in education. She is a member of Education Deans for Justice and Equity, and is co-author of the Guidelines for Teaching About Genocide and Intolerance that was published by the National Council of Teachers of English. And she is here today to talk about hate starts younger than you think. Rose, welcome.
Thank you. I'm very happy that you're here, and thank you for coming. I've got a microphone on my ear.
Oh,
Can you
no,
hear?
I'm right, yes.
Yeah, okay. So, yeah, I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm not a highfalutin anybody. My first 5 years of life was spent on West 67th Street in Manhattan, which the whole neighborhood came from the same town in Italy. And we had, which was East, Lago Ameno and Ischia near Naples. So we spoke Napolitan. At that time, there was no official Italian. And so everybody spoke a dialect, and you didn't understand anybody from any other place in Italy because of the city-state situation in its past. So anyhow, we were very poor. We had a 3-room apartment. My grandparents, my maternal grandparents, were a catty corner from our apartment. And they didn't have a bathroom in their apartment. They had the whole bathroom with the thing over the, it was a dumbbell tenement. So, West 67th Street, people say to me, you're from the Upper West Side. Are you kidding me? That was not the Upper West Side. Frank Costello was our mob leader, and that was our neighborhood. In 1955, we were told that they were going to demolish the neighborhood, and everything was condemned. And my grandfather, fortunately, had a lot in Babel, Long Island. Babel is a 3-mile peninsula on the north shore of Long Island, the Gold Coast. All these rich people live, except in Babel. And my father built our house by hand so that I could start kindergarten on Long Island rather than in the city, because my brother had not such a good time in the schools in the city already. When I got to school, the kindergarten teacher realized that I could read. And how the heck could I read? Coming from this poor family, not even a Bible in our park, nothing. We had the daily news. And I read the daily news with my father, and I went into kindergarten able to read. I'm going to tell you this, I'm sure many of you are grandparents. I know when you're a grandparent, your kids don't like to hear how to raise their kids. But I'm telling you, the research is very clear that when you raise a child in a bilingual household, the child has a higher verbal IQ. And so that was what saved me, because I was very Italian, and other kids were coming to school with peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and I'm coming with meatball heroes. And so at that time, it was okay to express prejudice and bias. And so I've been called a guinea, a wab, a dago, all that in my lifetime. I think younger people now maybe may not experience that much, but the door kind of was closed on that kind of behavior during the 60s and 70s in this country. And we thought we were moving ahead. Martin Luther King, my God, watching I Have a Few Dreams speech on TV, you know, we were so fortunate to have seen that and to have lived through that. And then all of a sudden, the door was closed and another door was open in our society. And that's why I'm here, to talk about that. How hate and prejudice can be implicitly taught. It can also be explicitly taught. It's a very, very fine line between both, especially if the door gets open. Then it can be more explicit than it ever was. So that's what this talk is about. But I want to go back to some of the research that we did. The Committee on Teaching about Genocide and Intolerance of the National Council of Teachers of English was a national committee. And I got appointed to it because I had been so involved in social justice, in education, and in my life. You want to raise the volume?
Yes.
I'm sorry. Okay, yeah, that's good. Okay. Yeah, I didn't, yeah, I wasn't thinking about that. So thank you, appreciate it. So I had been so involved, and I sent my resume, and they said, you're appointed to this. So another fluke of, you know, our assumptions about people. My last name is my married name, Rudzinski. My husband's passed away, and I kept it now. My degrees will say that. My maiden name was Molignano. And my father took out the first N because nobody could pronounce it. He turned it into Molignano. And that was my maiden name. But it got out around here that I'm on this national committee about teaching about genocide and intolerance, and the Sullivan County Jewish Star comes to interview me. And I'm like, I didn't tell them I wasn't Jewish. I just couldn't do it. Had a whole article about me, and it was a national committee. I didn't say anything about my ethnicity. I'm a first generation Italian American. I'm Catholic and I'm Buddhist. I became a Tibetan Buddhist in 1995 on top of my Catholicism. I played the organ at St. Joseph's Church, and I played the organ at St. Stan's in Pleasant Valley as well. So I've been playing the organ for a long time. In the 60s, a lot of people had organs in their house. And my mother heard me playing on a toy piano, and she's like, huh, she's got something there. She's got a charge card, took me to Macy's and bought me a Hammond B3. And I still have it. And now it's the premier rock and roll organ. It's that organ that had the black keys on one end and had the speaker that went around. And it's like, the Leslie speaker, I've got one. When I tell people I have it, they're like, oh, give it to me when you die. And I'm like, no. I'm thinking, my kids won't want it because they don't play the organ. I was thinking maybe the new church on 208. We have an African American church, and it's also the gospel organ. So it would be put to good use. So I'm going to tell you one more thing. I came to New Paltz because it was the first generation kind of school. I went to SUNY Oneonta when I went to college. I was in honors programs and everything when I was in high school, and I was accepted at Juilliard and at the Eastman School of Music, and I don't have the self-confidence. I knew I'd crack under all the pressure, so I didn't accept those. But my history teacher's daughter went to Oneonta, so I went to Oneonta. Well, my father disowned me when I went to college. He said a girl should not go to college. We should stay here and have children before you get too old. Your eggs dry up. He actually said that. And my mother was a lot more with it, even though I'm also a first generation high school graduate. Nobody ever graduated from high school. So I went on a full scholarship to SUNY Oneonta honors program. My mother sent me $20 a week by mail every week, and that's how I survived Oneonta. So there are some girls in this, even today, who have this kind of situation about education. The parents of many girls around the world don't have the school fees to send their daughters to school. They'll send the boys and not the girls. And then they'll send the girls to go out and get water far away because water sources are not near, and the girls will be raped, and you know, it's really, we have these situations in the world. And I want us to understand that those situations can be solved if we all get together and work on it. Of course, we have people who are alive now who are rich enough that they can eradicate poverty in the world, and they chose not to, they choose not to, which is too bad, because I probably would choose that. So I'm going to talk about you know, evil and good, and how we treat each other. And some of this is going to come from the Holocaust research, because the Holocaust was the most documented genocide in history. There have been other genocides. The genocide of the Christians by the Romans was pretty terrible. Terrible enough that when Italy, about a decade ago, said it didn't have the money to maintain the Colosseum, the Catholic Church bought it. So actually right now the Colosseum is owned by the Catholic Church because so many Christians were killed there. Yeah, I wouldn't know this, but I took my son there a few years ago, and that's what happened. So at least they used their money for some good too, because they shared the Colosseum, everybody could go there. So this is the title of this presentation, Don't Bow to the Kaiser. There was a great rescuer. One of the things we found is studying the Holocaust. You don't just study the Holocaust, you study the rescuers, because you want to know how you're going to prevent it or how you're going to solve it if it happens again. Because the thing is, it keeps happening. And so one of the rescuers was Ellen Hirschfeld. She lived in Berlin itself, and she housed Jewish, I'm going to think of the word, resistors, the Jewish resistors, dozens of them in her apartment. And thank goodness she didn't get caught. She was interviewed as recently as 1994. And in the interview, she thought about how she had been raised, how she'd had the courage. She said, first of all, she said, you don't think I have all these people here and something bad could happen. You just think we have a job to do and we're going to do it. And so that was her attitude, and she didn't get caught. But she said one of the things that she thought made her able to be that way was that she had a very strong self-efficacy sense, that she could do something, she could make a difference in the world. I think now a lot of us feel like, oh, I have no control over that, and I don't know what to do. She did the piece that she could do. And she recounted one time when she was with her father in a park, and all of a sudden the entourage of the Kaiser came by. And when the Kaiser came by, you had to bow. And everybody was bowing and bowing. Her father said to her, don't bow to the Kaiser. And that was a really strong message to her, a really strong lesson. You don't have to bow to tyrants. You don't have to follow them no matter what they do, because they have power. And so that she said that is what was instrumental in her becoming a rescuer during the Holocaust. And I'm sure during other genocides there have been other rescuers, but in the Holocaust we have a very literate population who has left us records. Gordon Allport is one of my heroes. He was one of the greatest psychologists of the 20th century. And he was an Indiana Methodist, but he had a great family life, and he was a real social justice advocate. He wrote two things that are very influential in the study of these things. The ABCs of Scapegoating in 1945. He was commissioned by B'nai B'rith to write some kind of theory as to how that Holocaust happened. How did this show happen? And I have the core of his work in that, which for the Committee on Teaching about Genocide and Intolerance was at the core of our guidelines for doing that kind of teaching. The other one is The Nature of Prejudice, and he actually, in the middle of the Jim Crow time and everything, he actually spoke out about this is prejudice. He actually then defined it, had a theory for it, and it's called one of the greatest books ever written in psychology, because of it. So I recommend both those. The ABCs of Scapegoating is a pamphlet. It's just a pamphlet where he talks about this is what happened. We go about that, and it makes a lot of sense, and it makes a lot of sense in many ways, and we'll see that. The quote at the beginning of The Nature of Prejudice is this: "For myself, earthbound and feathered to the scene of my activities, I confess that I do feel the differences of mankind, national and individually. I am, in plainer words, a bundle of prejudices made up of likings and dislikings, the various thrall to sympathies, apathies and antipathies," a quote from Charles Lamb. And he is expressing something that is implicit in all of us. We have biases, and we've been taught them implicitly, not overtly. I have a short example of how overtly biases can be taught on a video, but bias can be taught by, when I was growing up, the reading books were Dick, Jane, Sally, Spot, and Puff. Everybody was white, including the dog. And now, if you were an African-American kid, where were you? You weren't in the books. And we, in education, I mean, education as in 1972, we have changed that. We've made it a lot more variety, a lot more variety, the types of people, the types of cultures, the types of dress, the food, everything in the books now is highly inclusive of the world, which it should be. We are all a humanity. We're not here to hate each other over skin color or religious practices. So and this was really one of the first times that someone analyzed prejudice and said, this is it here, and it's invisible to the people who hold it, unless they think. Unless they think about it, it's invisible. And so if you tell somebody that, oh, that's racist, I'm not racist right away, right? And then that closes the door to any growth in that person. And so, because it's invisible to them too. Allport's mother said she had a theory. The 19th century was a theory of the century of character. You know, Victorian, everybody had it. It was pretty proven proper. The 20th century, and she's writing this in the 1920s, is the century of personality. This is the F. Scott Fitzgerald time, the Roaring 20s. People were wearing their beaver coats, and it was people had style. It was personality. And now I'm looking at the 21st century and thinking, what is this the century of? It's the century of influencers. There's a lot in the media about this person is an influencer. She has 1 million followers on TikTok, and she does makeup. So the influence isn't just political or racial. It's in every aspect of our lives. If you have a camera and you do something and somebody likes it, all of a sudden 1 million people could be following you, and then you're an influencer, and you get money, you get advertisements, you get all sorts of things. So I think the influencer is the epitome of the 21st century. However, the difference between that century and the other two may be that the line between fact and fiction, truth and lie, has been blurred tremendously. And so that's where we have a real problem, because it seems like a lot of people can't distinguish between the truth and what's not the truth. And that's very, very dangerous for us as a species and for us as a world. To deny that in the past 2 years the climate has changed and we get a lot more rain here, other places get a lot less. To deny that after experiencing it and saying, I have a brother, my brother, Republicans grew up on Long Island. He said, "You're going to talk to me about January 6th, aren't you?" And I did not answer him, but if I talked to him, I'd say, I saw with my own eyes what people did, and so did you. But he doesn't believe that now. And so the line between fact and fiction is very, very blurry now. The 20th century for me was the century of genocide. And in 1890, we have the massacre at Wounded Knee. The massacre at Wounded Knee is very important to me because I studied ethnomusicology at SUNY Binghamton, and that's where I learned about the massacre at Wounded Knee. So I went to the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota with my little recorder, like an ornithologist, trying to record a song that was used with the ghost dance. Because the people there at Wounded Knee were pacifists. They believed in the ghost dance religion, which had come out of the Puget Sound area, where the precept was that if they sang these songs, did these dances, wore the spirit shirts, with the images on them, the white people would all die and go away. Because by then, it was obvious that the white people wanted the whole continent. The other day I was on Huguenot Street and walked into a tour, and the docent was saying how he was by the wigwam. He said when the Muncie were here, and the French and the Dutch came in, they offered them a lot of nice things, and they said, we want to live here. And they thought, okay, they don't own we don't own the land, they're not going to own the land. They didn't even have the concept of ownership. So I said, sure, you go, and we'll just move a little bit, and when you leave, we'll come back. Well, the Europeans had the concept of land ownership, and that was not what happened. And so the Muncie had to move to Wisconsin, finally, in order to find a place where it was habitable for them. And then, so by 1890, we had wiped out almost the entire population of Native people. And the ghost dance was the last straw, the last hope for the people in the Midwest. The East had already fallen to the Europeans. And so there were ghost dance things going on. It was a pacifist religion. The cavalry came in, and somehow a shot was fired. They don't know who shot it or where it came from, but the cavalry got spooked, and they followed children, running children on horseback, and shot them. They shot 300 people and buried them in mass graves, and it was cold, it was winter. So that was a genocide on our soil. And that genocide continues with that population. The indigenous population is the poorest population in our country even today. The Armenian genocide in 1915, Turkey denies it. They say it didn't happen. This is men being taken for slaughter, and there are many images of the women left with the children when the men were. And if you go to Jerusalem, there's an Armenian quarter, and in the Armenian quarter they have signs, don't forget our genocide. The Holocaust. And that didn't start in 1938. Kristallnacht was 1938. Before that, they had some Nuremberg laws. And so people in power can use law to oppress people. And that was a major genocide, very well documented. The cultural genocide of Tibet, 1949 to 1976, is still occurring. They kidnapped the Panchen Lama, number 2 in the religion. I don't know, 20 years ago. He was a little kid. They've never found him since. When the Dalai Lama dies, China's going to choose the next Dalai Lama, whether we like it or not. And that destroys their religion, destroys their color, it destroys their culture. And now Putin is doing the same in Ukraine. He wants to put the people of Ukraine to believe that they are Russian. And so whenever they take over a town, they steal all the cultural artifacts from the churches and the libraries and take it back to Russia, or they destroy it. So cultural genocide is just as bad almost as physical genocide. Cambodia and Laos, 1975. The 20th century was not nice. Rwanda, 1994. These are people who took shelter in a church. So all parts of this. If you can implicitly teach bias and prejudice, or you can explicitly teach it. Hitler chose to explicitly tap into the latent anti-Semitism in Europe. Europe has a long history of anti-Semitism. Think about the Merchant of Venice, and think about the caricature of Shylock. And so he took that and he just kept blaming the Jews. The Jews are the reason why. The reason why everybody in Germany was poor, their money was worth nothing, was that the Treaty of Versailles did that to them. They were bad and they got nailed. And so anti-locution is negative talk about the group. And when you hear someone who's racist now, they'll say negative talk about people of color. they don't wear their pants right. They don't, they're not like us. Stereotyping. The stereotype of the Jew in Shylock is, the Merchant of Venice is obvious. Stereotyping was occurring right all the way throughout the Third Reich. And then scapegoating. It's their fault. They're the ones who did this to us, where that wasn't the case at all. Dehumanization. They've been dissed enough, disrespected enough that by the time you get to this step, you don't view them as human beings anymore. And when you don't think that they're human beings, you think, well, maybe I need to squash them. And that's what happened. Loss of rights. So they make laws against the people, and then the people get arrested for breaking those laws, and then when you're in prison, they can do anything to you. You can be tortured. You can be forced to labor. Even in our prison stay here, stuff is made by people in prison. It's forced labor. Loss of rights. The law says you don't have it. Physical attack, torture, incarceration, and then finally murder. So the Holocaust had these steps. They weren't all in one, in that order, but it was all mixed until it got to the end. And that's how it happened in the other genocides too. So what can we learn from that? First of all, we have to think about what is moral behavior. There's a difference between morality and conventions. Conventions are things like, you're not supposed to pick your nose in public. We have that convention. Not every culture has that. I've been on planes flying internationally, guy next to me is picking his nose like nuts, and it's just, it's okay. There's nothing inherently right or wrong with those actions. They're, in fact, they are arbitrary. It's an arbitrary choice by them. And we are very influenced in our culture by the puritanical people who came here when we were first started. Moral acts are intrinsically tied to consequences such as harm to others, violations of rights, effects on general welfare. They're inherent in social relationships. You can hurt somebody, and you don't have to hit them to hurt them. And so that's something that occurs to me. Now, how do we deal with moral behavior? It's thinking and reasoning about conduct and its moral and ethical implications. Now, I don't know about you, but a lot of young people today are being raised not to think this way. They don't, it's just not, it's not something that's a prominent thing in their lives. So that's where going from a culture of character and then personality and then now to influencer, the character's far away. And unless you make a concerted effort to teach character to children, it's a problem. So I've been a teacher for 50 years. During this time, we've really worked on character education. It was really big in education. But now they call it social emotional learning because it's still there, but it's not on the test. And so if you're being judged by your test scores, it's not going to be the first thing you teach. Behavior in moral context is a lot easier to be good in school, most of the time, to be good in church, than it is to be, at home and in the street. And your feelings about others and moral matters in general. Do we ever think about that? It's not something, it doesn't have to be religion. It has to be, am I harming, am I helping? Am I here to do good in the world? And then our identity as moral beings. We forget that we have a choice. Very few species have a choice of choosing right or wrong. I love nature, and I've been doing I do a lot of reading about nature. And orcas are dolphins, they have fairs, like we have fairs, and one fair the dolphins had in the past 10 years, that orcas had in the past 10 years, was to wear a salmon hat. One dolphin, one orca came out with a salmon on her head, and she, swimming around, and then it became a fad, and it was a massive thing of orcas with the salmon, what they call the salmon hat. Google it, the salmon hat on orcas. And then the fad went out. just like fads for us. Bell bottoms, you know, how long did we have skinny jeans? All of a sudden now they're with it, baggy, so baggy, it's like, it's ridiculous. This is fashion, they have fashion. So there's nothing wrong or right about that. Our identity as moral beings, I wonder if whales and orcas and dolphins have a sense of right and wrong. I mean, they may. They just can't, they can't express it. You know, elephants have funerals, and they come back and revisit the spot where they left their dead. And there was a great elephant advocate in South Africa, and when he died, a massive herd of elephants came to honor him. So we're not the only ones. We are not, you know, the supreme in this, but we have a lot more control than any other species on Earth. And we have to identify with that responsibility is ours. So there are theories of moral development. I'm not going to go into them because I realize I'm being a little bit too, you know, too much of a professor. So when we were working on the committee on genocide and intolerance, I looked at all courts continuum. I said, I see that in kids. I see kids, you know, making fun of each other, sticks and stones will break my bones, and they will never hurt me. Wrong. Your mental health as an adult is really based on how you were treated as a child. And so if you were an outcast as a child, you're going to have problems when you get older. And so it's name calling, mocking, insulting, all those things, and the internet and cyberspace has made this a lot easier to do to each other. And so has AI. So I put AI in there. I added AI. It didn't exist when I first came up with this. This original parallel children's behaviors is in the National Council of Teachers of English guidelines on teaching about genocide and intolerance. So kids stereotype, you know, oh, you're a geek, you know, you're hip hop. They stereotype each other, and some stereotypes, you're an outcast is a stereotype. The ostracism and rejection. One of my favorite teachers of all time is Vivian Gusson Paley. She was a kindergarten teacher at the John Dewey Kindergarten at the University of Chicago for 40 years. She wrote several books, and one of her books was about her teaching and saying to the kids, democratic classroom, you can't say you can't play. Now, when I was the presiding officer of the faculty, I had a little, you know, more power to choose the honorary doctors. She got an honorary doctorate when I was the presiding officer. So Dolores Huerta, the chief of the tribe who took over the Alcatraz, all social justice people. So you can't say you can't play. Well, the girl who's the biggest bully in the class says, I don't like that rule. And she goes through this whole process of trying to get them to be empathetic, so that in the end, what happens is, of course, this was such a parallel to the Holocaust. When this girl Lisa would abuse this other girl who wasn't speaking, there's a lot of children who come to kindergarten, they don't talk. It's not that abnormal, and it eventually works out. But this girl wasn't speaking, and Lisa was just like, "You can't play with us." She was different. She didn't speak, and nobody came to her aid. All the other kids were so afraid of Lisa that they became bystanders. Now, if you know anything about the Holocaust research, that's exactly what happened in the Holocaust. And so it could start that young. It starts that young. It's like, I don't want to get involved because she's going to then pick on me and I'm going to get hurt. And so Haley goes through this whole process. She makes up a magical bird that takes them to the land of loneliness and teaches the kids empathy. And then finally, as Lisa's still herself, but the next time Lisa abuses this girl, another kid says, hey, this is for Haley. She's doing that to Lisa again. Comes to her aid. And then they start coming to the girl's aid, and she becomes a lot more accepted by the whole class. And so Haley was a great teacher, even though she just taught kindergarten. She wrote several books about that. All you have to do is help somebody who doesn't have empathy to have it. And right now, we have people who have absolutely no empathy in power, who are, espousing the most ridiculous untruths, and it's kind of scary. Cyberbullying, we've seen these things happen. You don't have to physically attack. A lot of the time, the person kills themselves. And that we've seen that a lot, especially at the college level. It happens at the college level. So we really have to wonder how do we get the society to come back to being more of a society of character? So these are some of the things I suggested. First of all, speech does hurt. Words have power. As soon as you hear a kid making fun of another kid or demeaning anybody, stop it at the speech level, or it's going to go up. Encourage empathy in children. Volunteer with them. Be a caring example. Watch what you say and do about people who are not like you. Expose your children and your family to those who are different from you as equals, not as people you're always giving to them. And be open and not being afraid of others. There's a microaggression called othering, making somebody else the other rather than one of us as a person. So what we did was we went through the rescue research. If you go and find out what to do about something like a genocide, you go to see who rescued and why. And there's not one single type of rescuer. Oscar Schindler was a really bad guy. But somehow he had it in his heart. You know why? Because the people worked for him and he knew them. So we saw that a lot. They knew Jews. They didn't, even if they let their neighbors get taken away, once they got to know a Jewish person, they realized, oh, they're like me. And then so Schindler, I think, was turned around by that. Mostly, they already had this in them. Like Ellen Hirschfeld, who said, when her father said, don't bow to the Kaiser, okay, I'm not going to do what they say. I'm going to do what I think is the right thing to do. And that's mostly what they said. It happened, I'm there, I'm not going to let that happen. There were no absolute predictors, and it can't be explained by reductionist theories. You can't say, oh, they planned to do it. It was spontaneous every time. The situation came, and they responded in the situation and in the way that was humane. And so that's something to think about today as well. Okay, so they have 6 commonalities. They were raised to be individuals. Individuality, independence, history of altruistic behavior toward the helpless. It's really important to do that kind of stuff without being above. A perception of their helping behavior as ordinary. Who wouldn't do that, they said. Well, there are plenty of people who didn't. An unplanned initiation of the rescue. It was never planned ahead of time. It was always on the spot. And an understanding of Jews as people like all others. Jews were included in their definition of humanity. So example of Pearl Owen are the big names in rescue research. And they said backgrounds that foster self-esteem just like the others, a sense of being able to make a difference, involvement, commitment, care, and responsibility, a strong sense of personal efficacy. You have to have bravery of some sort, and it comes from being raised that way. I taught at Columbia after I graduated, and there were a lot of people who came there from private schools, and you could tell the difference. The people from the private schools, oh yeah, I have an opinion. People went to public school because they were told to sit down and shut up. What you say doesn't matter. So that was a really interesting thing for me to see. Eva Goldblum, Constitution Curve, another really great book. They rescued for moral reasons. They loved their Jewish friends. They had Jewish friends. They had anti-Nazi views. They were helping for professions, many of them, which was part of their way of life. And they were children of rescuers. They learned from their parents. So here we are, we're the elders. And we have some information on how to make our children be more self-efficacy, have more self-efficacy, be rescuers if this ever kind of happens. And I think that it's important that we know those things. So, I did study Tibetan Buddhism. I do still meditate. I met the Dalai Lama a couple times. And you know, he looks at you like you were his mother. He looks at you with so much love. And so, knowing other people, just knowing them, appreciating and understanding them, and not judging them. Bond with them, have empathy for them, have compassion and caring, and then have altruism, and the Dalai Lama's greatest phrase, have loving kindness toward all. That's the way we're going to make a better world. I think that's the end. Yes. Any questions, concerns, or comments?
Questions?
Joe.
Questions?
Yes, I have a few questions.
Wait a minute, there's a broken microphone.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good.
Yes, when you refer to the Holocaust, you refer only to the Jews, or you refer to the 9 million?
You're right. I mean, you know what? There's such a rise in anti-Semitism right now. It's my main concern. But you're right. The Roma, the gay people, political prisoners, Catholic priests were thrown off roofs of buildings because they wouldn't bow to the Kaiser, right? But the 6 million were the biggest population. And I don't know if you saw January 6th, but I watched January 6th weeping. When they did that. And there was a guy with a sweatshirt that said, 6 million wasn't enough. Did you see that? 6 million. So that's why. That's why. But there were plenty of other people. There were 11 million people. 11 million.
Yes, another thing that can come to my attention is that you speak, or I agree with you about what parents need to do. The question is what parents need to do against the education that they got out of the house. I give you an example. I am an Israeli, my children were born in Israel, and they go to school until they were in 7th grade. One day, my 4 years old came home and said, Ima, you know something? All these Arabs, they want our small land, and they have so many places to go.
Could they teach
By
you
a
in school?
chance, kindergarten, 4 years old. By a chance, in my household, we have a lot of friends that were Palestinian, and it was after the 57, Israeli they have a lot of places to go. What do you do about that institutional? I don't know to call it graduation. I don't know how to call it, but
No, it's an institutional bias that's overtly taught, right? And it's happening on the other side too. I'm going to show you something that I wasn't going to show you. You think I should show it?
Please.
Okay. So I'm going to close this out, and you're going to be surprised. All right. Where's that guy? Oh wait, let me see. Here. Okay. And, okay, USB drive, which one am I? This one? That's me. It's happening on both sides, and we have to make sure that we understand that it's both sides, and somehow we have. Yeah, now what am I doing? I'm in the Cornell University Master Beekeeper program, and I'm doing presentations on beekeeping. I'm sorry. I love my bees. This is video here.
فقر اليهود بيحكوا لنا هذول غدارين بيحكوا لنا ان هذول بيقتلونا هذول مسماح اذا
عليهم بيعلمونا بالمدرسة انهم ارهابيين
They teach us that the Jews would wear underwear.
Yes, narrated because it's hard to read.
All right, so it's a bit bad, you know, that way.
Listen to that.
It's very short, it's like a minute long.
Turning you off on the internet.
So I say we teach it implicitly. It's being taught explicitly in the Palestinian areas and in Israel by people who are not responsible. I mean, there are other people. I had two professors at Columbia, my two really mentors, who were two of the first Jewish professors to be hired by Columbia, and they were hired in the late 1950s. Columbia was 100 years old by then, but they were hired the last group. And they took part in a high school in Jerusalem that was Palestinians and Arabs and Jews together, the kids, so that they could teach them how similar they were. I don't even know if that high school still exists because of all the antipathy now. But I'm going to try to have my pause. I'm going to give a pause to read what they said, right?
Read it out loud because it's hard to read.
Right, yeah, it is hard to read, but there's 3 languages up there.
When else you put it out?
فقر اليهود بيحكوا لنا هدول غدارين وبيحكوا لنا ان هدول بيغدرونا هدول
They teach us in school.
بطعا بدعس عليهم بيعلمونا انه الاقصى النا والنا يعني الحق يعني النا فلسطين والاراضي كلها النا
نعمل حرب انه نفرجي اليهود انه احنا مش انه احنا مش شاطرين احنا
It goes so fast.
نعمل حرب انه نفرجي اليهود انه احنا مش
These kids are telling you what they're being taught in school in Gaza and the West Bank. Okay. So the name of this is counter-terrorist survey. Can you do the touch thing this faster than I can do? I'm used to a mouse. You can play and then stop it right away. Play and then pause.
اليهود بيحكوا لنا
Okay. They teach us in school that Jews are fickle, bad people. This stuff is centuries old. Try again.
Can you make it a little louder, Joe?
Yeah, between the too loud and too soft. She said, yeah, I'd be happy to.
So this is,
That was too loud and she was too soft.
yeah, that teaching is not just on one side, it's on both sides.
هدول غدارين وبيحكوا لنا ان هدول بيغدرونا هدول مش منيح اذا بس
I am ready to stand the Jew. Okay,
طبعا بدعس عليهم بيعلمونا انه الاقصى النا
Okay, and drive a car over them. That's lit. I'm ready to stand the Jew and drive a car over them. Now this one says, at school they teach us that Al-Aqsa and all of Palestine is ours.
وإلنا يعني الحق يعني إلنا فلسطين والأراضي كلها إلنا
نعمل حرب انه
We have to make war.
نفرجي اليهود انه احنا مش انه
To prove that we are stronger than the Jews.
احنا مش شاطرين احنا قوي يعني
بيعلمونا
Wait a second. Yes, they teach us that the Zionists are our enemy.
إن الصهيونية هم أعدائنا وهم أهم شيء لازم
And we must fight them.
يسووا فيهم عملية.
عليهم بيعلمونا بالمدرسة انهم ارهابيين.
Wait a second. They teach us that Jews are terrorists. I will.
العمليات.
Go ahead, do two.
الداعش. العمليات.
We don't do that yet, but yeah, you do have it. I think he said.
داعش عمليات الطعن.
I think he said I'm going to fight for.
والاشتباك المسلح في
Go backwards. Go backwards. You do love to touch.
المخيمات. إيش أكيد هدول العمليات رح ترفع الراس
Stabbing and running over Jews brings dignity
ولا
to
فلسطين.
Palestinians.
العمليات هي تحت الداعش.
I'm going to run them over and stab them with knives.
أكيد هي إشي بيرفع الراس لفلسطين. إذا بدك بطلع بستشفى العام.
Right now, I'm prepared
في ناس بتحب فلسطين
People love Palestine and they are ready to die for Palestine.
بدهم يحاربوا وبضحوا بدمهم عشان فلسطين. أنا بدي أهزمهم بالحرب.
I'm going to fight against them, the Jews, and to end every war. With Allah's help, I will fight for ISIS, the Islamic State.
إن شاء الله أساعد الشباب مش راح يصير مقاوم بالمستقبل مع الدولة الإسلامية.
I think so. So, it's being taught in schools.
Can I have the mic?
Yes, sir.
There are dozens of these videos produced by the Israeli government.
Right.
I get them from my cousins, my nephews, my grandson, my grandchildren. I'm not my grandchildren, they are here. So, a lot of that, okay, it's just propaganda to justify what Israel is doing in Gaza. Let me finish.
Oh,
Okay?
yeah.
I have been in Israel for 20 years. I grew up there. I served in the army. I'm an officer in the army. I went to 3 wars, okay? And I can tell you lots of stories what we Israelis were doing in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Syria, okay? So, yes, this is true, perhaps, okay? But if you don't necessarily see what Israelis are doing now, going into houses in Gaza, our supposedly moral people, okay?
Right, no, I
So,
understand.
I agree, it's not all black and white, but there is a very, I mean, you show a slide will show what is the characters of the Holocaust. And I can say, I can check off each of those going on now in Palestine. And this didn't start on October.
No, that's before. I understand.
So I think we have to be careful when we bring this type of things and say, well, you know, it's equal on both sides. It's not equal on both sides. Okay?
Thank you.
More questions, comments?
I am happy to report, speak into it. I'm happy to report that there's some hope. My grandson attends a public school in Lincoln.
Can you speak up? Speak up.
It's not loud. Can you make it louder?
He's the one who controls the bar.
You're a technician, sorry.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. Like I said, I'm here to report that there is hope. My grandson attends a public school in Beacon. And he was in the 1st grade last year and received a Sergeant Star of the Week award for identifying and appreciating the good in others. This was in support of character importance that they put on. They say it's important to deliberately work to identify and appreciate others' character strengths. So I think for a
That's it.
6-year-old, that's pretty darn good.
That sounds really good. That sounds great. And that's what we're trying to achieve. And I didn't mean to equivocate, Israel's been accused of genocide, and it will go to the International Court of Justice. And so it's a terrible situation. Yes, Joe.
Question. Given that so often bias is implicit when people who are prejudiced don't realize and don't recognize that they are, how do you deal with that among kids?
Well, among kids it's a lot easier because you can externalize it into a story, and that's what the video did. You can make characters and see how the characters interact. And so it takes it out of the guilt that the person is made to feel by being told, oh, that's bias. But you have to do it early. And the National Association for the Education of Young Children has all this anti-bias curriculum that teachers get. But then administrators, who I teach, hopefully not anybody I teach, put pressure on them to do academics, when they lose sight of the fact that these young children are going to be adult human beings, and we have to teach them how to be good human beings. And there's too much focus on the academics now. Since we went to school, kindergarten is what 1st grade used to be. You have to walk into kindergarten, knowing your name, your address, and how to write everything. And that's not developmentally appropriate. for a 5-year-old. So, you know, this is, other kinds of ways of thinking are being imposed on our education system, where we could be the premier place in the world to try to foster peace, but the teachers are so distracted with test scores.
And also, we have, excuse me, a very politicized situation of school boards.
Yeah.
And school boards all over, I mean, I just read something about in Florida where they're removing.
They're banning books.
They're banning books in a lot of places, but they're removing from curriculum teaching actual history that they don't like.
Right.
So we've got.
That's very Nazi.
Right, exactly. So we have political people and school boards making decisions that you professionals should be making.
Right, and so I was the presiding officer of the faculty at this college when George Pataki appointed the SUNY Board of Trustees, and they went through all the syllabi of the system, especially Stony Brook was very liberal. Stony Brook had a course, we had a beautiful Black Studies department here, Margaret Ray Lewis, my dear colleague, and in Stony Brook they had a course in tap dancing. And of course, tap dancing has its roots in Africa. It was part of, you know, African American studies. They wanted, they said, we want that thrown out. History of jazz, they wanted that thrown out. And so this was that was a banning period. At that time, the faculty felt more empowered. I'm a presiding officer, and I was also the convener of the campus governance leaders of the system. So the system has a Senate, I'm there, I'm the convener. The Senate votes no confidence in the Board of Trustees. It's unheard of in the history of higher education. And then they say, we want to know what the campuses think. And I had to conduct the vote of no confidence at the 34 comprehensive colleges. The community colleges were different. At the comprehensive colleges, they took in those votes, and I had to do the vote of no confidence for the SUNY system in that Board of Trustees. This is the time that we had the Tea Party. And they were doing the same thing then. We fought back. The difference I see now is people aren't fighting back. People actually say, oh, that's great. So I don't know what happened, but the fight back is very soft. And the support for those things, the whole state of Florida is, you know, doing that.
Y'all can pass the mic, and then, go ahead.
Good.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I mean, I think your point is that, I mean, people need to educate in the proper sense, not just in classroom education.
Right.
And exposing people to other people and showing, I mean, this is one of the things that I think, at least I feel we managed to do a reasonable job, because not only our children, but our grandchildren,
Exactly.
okay, absorb that, and they have a totally different approach to things. And so this is feasible, it's not impossible, but you have to really start to understand that, I mean, it's not like, you know, you are the right one and the other one is
Right,
always
no,
wrong.
it's very true, and I'm hopeful that the grandchildren are going to, you know, work together better than we have.
You're next, 1 second.
Speaking of grandchildren, as many of you know, I have a background in psychology, but after I retired, I went back and got a master's degree in children's book writing and illustrating. And every first Sunday of the month in the library at 1 o'clock here, I present what I call the Children's Book Nook, where we look at picture books based on the topic that is being used in the library that month. And this month it is self-improvement. And I have a lot of books about opening up people's eyes to the world and how we are all equal. And so come by if you'd like to see some of that. There's a lot of wisdom in children's books, not only for children, but also for adults.
That's right. Yeah, children's literature is a great teacher.
Do you think that part of the problem is people are born. Do you think that people are born with certain characteristics? For instance, take all the dictators of the world. One thing that's very common amongst them, they don't give a hoot what they do to people.
Right.
They wouldn't think twice about it. They can wipe out 100 or 1,000 and don't worry about it.
Mm-hmm.
But take a nun, they wouldn't touch a fly. On the other hand, no, were they taught that way? Or
No.
were they born that way?
It's nature nurture is a very big argument in psychology, and it's both. It's both. But there are people with abnormal psychology for sure, and we're seeing some of it in some of the leaders who are saying things that they're saying and they want to do what they want to do. But the thing that's so disturbing is there are so many people who believe them and want to follow them. They don't understand that that person does not care about them at all. Somehow they've been convinced that that person cares about them, and they have no ability to care about them. So and you can't argue with these people. One of the things that the internet and all the media and the information that we have now has done is it's made us exposed to a lot of false things, a lot of lies. And you can believe a lie if you want to believe it, even in the face of physical evidence that it's a lie. And there are people who do that. Don't know why. Us in colleges, we're thinking, we're supposed to be teaching critical thinking. Didn't we teach critical thinking to these people? Don't know. We bought it. They didn't learn it.
I just want to recommend a book to people. It's called The Master and His Emissary. It is about the difference between our left brain views of the world and the right brain views of the world, and how in this book the man he's a psychiatrist, and he goes through and talks about the difference between the two parts of the brain, how they work together all the time. However, he then goes through the history of Western civilization as to when the left brain was dominant and when the right brain was dominant. And we are in a very left brain dominant time.
Yes, and it's not just the brain, it's also cultural. There is a big movement now to understand that the indigenous people had a much different society. We got our republic from the Muncie. We had our governmental system from the native people who were here. And so if you Google the indigenous worldview and the dominant worldview, you'll see a comparison on 50 counts from the indigenous worldview and the dominant worldview. For example, the dominant worldview is hierarchical. I'm your supervisor, I'm above you, and the indigenous worldview is much more egalitarian. And it goes right down to a whole bunch of different ways that we can be more like the indigenous, and we're much more democratic than we are. So that's out there in the research and out there in the theories as well.
If there is any other comments or questions,
Nice. And Jaco, thank you for, I'm not trying to equivocate, but you're right. What's happening there is bad.
Thank you, Rose, so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, so good seeing you. I can't believe it. Yeah.
Now, how's the
Sorry,
Quaker
we-
school?
Okay, that's right.
How does the Quaker school do it?
Oh, Quaker schools do it because just even a manner, right?
Why can't you do what they do?
Because we're all should be in a hurry. Okay. Between Columbus and Amsterdam, yeah. Oh, it was the Italian Jews, Koreans, yeah.
Before you know it, you're cousins.
Yeah, we did too. And thank you.
That was also on the lower side.
Yeah. Right, exactly. Yes. Yeah, it was the same. They called it the dumbbell tennis. It was the same. Yeah.
Thank you.
When I was a little girl, I watched my mom.
Will you carefully